The observation deck of the Galactic War College stretched across the entire northern wall of the Central Command facility. Transparent aluminum panels offered a perfect view of the massive simulation chamber below, where holographic projections could recreate any battlefield scenario in the known galaxy. Commander Thex stood at the front of the deck, her scaled hands clasped behind her back as she watched the various species representatives take their seats. Today was special. Today marked the first time humans would participate in the annual Battle Doctrine Assessment. Thex had spent 3 months reviewing the files of the 6 human cadets who would enter the simulation. Their species had only joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago, and their military doctrine remained largely unknown to the other member worlds. The humans called their planet Earth, a world classified as a Class 7 death world by the Galactic Survey Corps. Only 12 other inhabited worlds in the entire galaxy carried that designation. The viewing gallery filled with officers and generals from 12 different species. The Velcrin delegation took their seats on the left side, their crystalline bodies refracting the ambient light into rainbow patterns. The Corthan military observers, massive beings that stood nearly 3 meters tall, carefully settled into reinforced seating near the back. Smaller species like the Plin and the Nexari clustered in the center sections, their translator devices humming softly as they conversed among themselves. Below in the briefing corridor, 6 humans waited. They wore standard cadet uniforms, dark blue with silver piping, but somehow they looked different from every other species that had stood in that same corridor over the past decades. Their postures seemed too casual, too relaxed. They did not stand at rigid attention like Velcrin cadets or maintain the ceremonial spacing of Corthan warriors. Instead, they stood in a loose cluster, occasionally speaking to one another in quiet voices. Claire Montgomery led the group. Her personnel file indicated she had graduated top of her class from the Earth Military Academy, specializing in rapid response tactics. She stood at average height for a human, with dark hair pulled back into a practical knot at the base of her skull. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the corridor, the equipment, the monitoring systems embedded in the walls. Owen Chin stood beside her, shorter and stockier in build, with close-cropped black hair and a tendency to tap his fingers against his thigh in a steady rhythm. Nadia Kovacs, tall and lean with blonde hair, kept checking a small data pad even though no information updates were being sent during the pre-briefing period. Simon Wright, dark-skinned and muscular, stretched his shoulders repeatedly as if preparing for physical exercise rather than a strategic simulation. Grace Park, the smallest of the group, had sharp features and eyes that seemed to see through walls. Kyle Anderson, red-haired and freckled, kept grinning at nothing in particular. Thex activated the communication panel. Her voice carried into the corridor below. Human cadets, please enter the command briefing room. The 6 humans moved as one unit, flowing through the doorway with a coordination that spoke of extensive training together. They arranged themselves in a semicircle facing the main display screen, their attention focused and ready. Thex descended from the observation deck via the central lift platform, emerging in the briefing room to stand before them. She began the standard briefing protocol. The simulation scenario loaded onto the display screens that surrounded them on 3 sides. A colony world appeared, rotating slowly to show its geography. A single continent with 3 major population centers. Limited defensive installations. A small orbital station. Standard civilian infrastructure. The scenario is as follows, Thex said, her translator converting her native language into the human tongue called English. Your mission is to defend this colony world against an attacking force. The enemy will approach from 3 vectors with overwhelming numerical superiority. You have the colony's existing defenses and a small garrison of troops under your command. The display shifted to show enemy force projections. Red indicators marked 3 separate fleets converging on the colony from different directions. The numbers were deliberately unbalanced. The attacking force outnumbered the defenders by a ratio of 5 to 1. The enemy will begin their assault at simulation start, Thex continued. Reinforcements from the Galactic Defense Fleet will arrive in 72 hours. Your objective is to maintain control of the colony until those reinforcements reach you. You must minimize civilian casualties, preserve critical infrastructure, and maintain your supply lines throughout the engagement. She paused, letting the information settle. Every cadet group that had faced this scenario approached it the same way. They established defensive perimeters. They rationed resources carefully. They fought a strategic withdrawal, trading space for time, falling back from one defensive line to the next over the course of 3 days. Some groups performed better than others, but none had ever truly won. The scenario was not designed to be won. It was designed to test how well cadets managed an impossible situation. This simulation has been used for 14 years, Thex added. It is considered one of the most challenging scenarios in the War College curriculum. Success is measured not by victory, but by how effectively you manage limited resources against superior forces. Your decisions will be evaluated by the observing generals. Do you have any questions? The humans looked at each other. Small gestures passed between them. Owen tilted his head slightly to the left. Nadia's eyebrow rose a fraction. Simon's jaw tightened. Kyle's grin widened. Grace's eyes narrowed in what might have been calculation or amusement. Claire raised her hand in a gesture that seemed almost childlike in its simplicity. Yes, Cadet Montgomery? Thex said. Just to clarify, Commander. We need to hold the colony for 72 hours. That is the primary objective, correct? Thex nodded slowly. Correct. Survival with minimal losses is the goal. The scenario is designed to be extremely difficult. No cadet group has ever achieved a perfect defense. Most groups lose between 30 and 50% of their forces over the 72-hour period. The best performance on record maintained 68% combat effectiveness when reinforcements arrived. Claire glanced at Owen. Something passed between them, a wordless communication that Thex could not begin to interpret. It happened in less than a second. Owen's mouth twitched at the corner, not quite a smile but close. Grace tilted her head slightly, a tiny gesture of agreement or understanding. Simon cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet briefing room. Nadia's fingers stopped tapping on her data pad. Kyle's grin transformed into something sharper, more focused. Claire turned back to face Thex. Her expression remained polite, respectful, appropriate for addressing a superior officer. But something had changed in her eyes. A spark had ignited, or perhaps a decision had been made. What if we just ended it? Claire asked. Her tone was conversational, curious, as if she were asking about the weather or the quality of the cafeteria food. Up in the observation deck, 12 alien generals leaned forward in their seats. Thex felt her scales prickle along her spine, an evolutionary response to the presence of a predator. She did not understand the sensation. These were cadets, young and untested. They could not possibly pose a threat. Ended it? Thex repeated carefully. The scenario, Claire clarified. What if we ended the scenario? Would that satisfy the victory conditions? The other 5 humans were grinning now, all of them, and Thex suddenly understood why Earth was classified as a death world. The simulation chamber hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. Holographic projectors created a perfect replica of the colony world, complete with buildings, terrain, and defensive installations. The 6 humans stood at the command console, their hands moving across the controls as the countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Commander Thex watched from the observation deck above. Beside her, General Korthos of the Velkrin Defense Forces leaned forward in his seat. They will establish a perimeter first, he predicted. Standard defensive doctrine requires securing the civilian centers before anything else. The countdown reached 0. The simulation began. The humans moved instantly. Not as a single unit toward the colony center, but in 3 separate directions. Claire turned to Owen and Nadia, spoke 2 words that the audio pickups could not catch, and then all 6 cadets were running. Not walking quickly to their posts. Not moving with measured military precision. Running at full speed as if something was chasing them. Claire grabbed Simon's arm and pointed toward the eastern edge of the colony. They sprinted together through the holographic streets, their boots hammering against the solid projection floor. Grace followed them, her smaller size allowing her to keep pace easily. They did not stop at any of the defensive emplacements. They did not check civilian shelters. They ran straight past the primary command center without even looking at it. Owen and Kyle split off toward the northern section. Nadia went south, alone, moving with a speed that shocked the observers. She vaulted over a low wall, rolled under a scanner array, and disappeared into the industrial sector in less than 30 seconds. What are they doing? General Korthos whispered. His crystalline face reflected the holographic light in confused patterns. On the main display, red indicators showed the enemy forces beginning their approach. 3 fleets, each with dozens of ships, closing in on the colony from different angles. Standard procedure called for the defenders to activate orbital defense platforms, establish overlapping fields of fire, and prepare fallback positions. The humans had done none of these things. Claire and her team reached the eastern sector in under 3 minutes. The simulation had placed an enemy staging area there, a location where attacking forces would establish their forward ammunition depot once they landed. It was deep in enemy territory, far beyond any reasonable defensive perimeter. Claire did not hesitate. She pointed at Simon and Grace, made quick hand gestures, and all three of them moved toward the depot's security systems. In the observation deck, a Korthan general named Vrex stood up from his seat. His massive frame trembled with agitation. They have abandoned the colony center entirely. This is madness. The civilians are completely exposed. Vex said nothing. She watched the display screens showing Owen and Kyle in the northern sector. They had reached an enemy supply convoy that was moving through the simulation, carrying fuel and weapons toward the forward staging areas. The convoy consisted of 6 heavy transport vehicles, each one loaded with enough explosive materials to level several city blocks. Owen did not attack the convoy. Instead, he climbed onto the lead vehicle while it was still moving. Kyle provided covering fire, forcing the simulated enemy guards to take cover, giving Owen the seconds he needed to access the transport's control system. Within 45 seconds, Owen had overridden the security protocols and taken control of the entire convoy. Impossible, General Vrex muttered. The convoy security systems are military-grade. It should take at least 20 minutes to bypass them, even with expert equipment. But Owen was already redirecting the convoy, turning all 6 vehicles away from their designated route and toward the enemy fleet's projected landing zone. Kyle jumped onto the second vehicle, and together they accelerated, pushing the transports far beyond their normal speed limits. Nadia had reached the communication hub in the southern sector. This was a critical piece of infrastructure, the main relay station that connected the colony to orbital defenses and long-range sensors. Every military doctrine in the Galactic War College emphasized protecting communication hubs above almost everything else. Losing communications meant losing coordination, which meant losing battles. Nadia destroyed it in 90 seconds. She did not simply damage it. She accessed the main control interface, uploaded something from her personal data pad, and then physically tore out 3 critical components. The communication hub went completely dark. The display screens in the observation deck flashed red warnings. Multiple generals gasped in shock. She has cut off all defensive coordination, General Korthas said, his voice rising. Without communications, the garrison forces cannot respond to threats. This is a catastrophic failure of basic tactical doctrine. Thex leaned closer to the displays. Nadia had not left the communication hub. She was still working at the console, her fingers moving impossibly fast across the controls. Whatever she had uploaded was doing something to the system, something that spread beyond the colony's network and reached outward. 5 minutes had passed since the simulation began. Claire's team had breached the enemy ammunition depot. The facility's defenses were substantial, designed to withstand a coordinated assault by a full company of troops. Claire, Simon, and Grace went through those defenses like they did not exist. They used shaped charges on the walls, moved through the resulting gaps before the smoke cleared, and took down security systems with a precision that suggested they had trained for this exact scenario 1,000 times. But they had not. Thex had personally designed this simulation only 6 weeks ago. The humans could not have prepared for these specific challenges. Yet they moved as if they had memorized every detail. Simon reached the main storage area first. Rows of artillery shells, missiles, and explosive materials filled the warehouse-sized space. He planted small devices on 4 different support columns, spacing them with exact precision. Claire and Grace provided security, watching the entrances, but no enemy forces arrived to stop them. The simulation's defensive AI was still responding to threats at the colony center, where it expected the human cadets to be. Owen's convoy raced across the northern sector at dangerous speeds. The transports were never designed to move this fast. Warning indicators flashed across their control panels, alerts that the vehicles were exceeding structural safety limits. Owen ignored all of them. Kyle had climbed to the top of the second transport and was using welding equipment to secure all 6 vehicles together, creating a single massive chain of explosives. The enemy fleets were beginning their descent now. Atmospheric entry protocols engaged. The first wave of dropships separated from the main carriers, preparing to establish landing zones. The simulation's AI calculated optimal deployment positions, factoring in expected defensive fire and civilian population centers. It did not account for what the humans had done. Nadia's corruption program spread through the communication hub's destroyed systems and reached the orbital sensor network. The sensors were still functioning, still gathering data about the incoming enemy fleets. But now that data was being altered before it reached the enemy command ship. False readings flooded the enemy tactical displays. Phantom signals appeared across the colony, suggesting defensive positions that did not exist, reinforcements that had not arrived, weapons batteries that were purely fictional. The enemy AI responded to these false threats. It redirected ships, altered approach vectors, divided forces to address multiple perceived dangers. The three coordinated fleets began to lose their coordination. 10 minutes had elapsed. Claire triggered the charges at the ammunition depot. The explosion was massive, far larger than necessary. The entire eastern sector vanished in a bloom of fire that reached hundreds of meters into the air. The blast wave spread outward, shattering windows across half the colony. Secondary explosions followed as stored munitions cooked off in a cascading chain reaction that continued for 30 seconds. Owen aimed his convoy of captured transports directly at the enemy command ship as it descended through the atmosphere. The ship's defensive systems detected the threat, calculated that it was merely a group of transport vehicles, and assigned minimal point defense resources to destroy them. Those calculations did not account for the fact that Owen had merged all 6 transports into a single projectile. The transports hit the command ship's shields at full speed. The shields held for almost 2 seconds. Then the combined explosive payload of 6 military supply vehicles detonated simultaneously. The command ship tore apart from the inside, its hull rupturing in multiple places. Debris rained across the northern sector as the massive vessel fell from the sky in pieces. Nadia's false intelligence had caused the 3 enemy fleets to spread out, seeking phantom threats, destroying their own tactical cohesion. Without the command ship to coordinate them, the remaining vessels began emergency protocols. Some attempted to retreat. Others tried to complete their landing operations. Several ships collided as contradictory orders spread through the disorganized fleet. 15 minutes had passed since the simulation began. The simulation chamber's automated systems detected a terminal condition. Victory parameters had been achieved. The enemy command structure was destroyed. The attacking forces were scattered and ineffective. Additional combat would serve no purpose. The holographic projections froze, then faded. The colony world disappeared. The 6 human cadets stood in the empty chamber, breathing hard from their exertion but otherwise unmarked. In the observation deck, absolute silence reigned. 12 generals from 12 different species stared at the displays, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The colony was destroyed. Civilian casualties were estimated at 70%. Critical infrastructure was gone. Supply lines had been deliberately severed. The humans had won. Commander Thex's voice was barely audible, a whisper that her translator almost failed to pick up. They violated every principle of warfare we teach. The conference room filled within 5 minutes of the simulation's end. Generals from 12 species crowded around the circular table, their voices rising in multiple languages before the translators could keep pace. Commander Thex stood at the head of the table, her hands pressed flat against its surface, trying to maintain some sense of order. The 6 human cadets waited in the corridor outside, under guard, though the guards seemed uncertain about what exactly they were guarding against. General Vrex of the Corthan military spoke first, his massive frame towering over the others. This is completely unacceptable. Those cadets destroyed 70% of the civilian population. 70%. That is not a military victory. That is a massacre. General Korthos added his voice, his crystalline form reflecting his agitation in sharp, jagged patterns of light. They abandoned every defensive position. They left the colony center completely exposed. If this had been a real engagement, those civilians would have died in the first 10 minutes of fighting. A smaller delegate from the Nexari Confederation raised one of her 4 arms. The communication hub. They destroyed their own communications. How can any military force coordinate without communications? This violates the most basic principles of warfare. Thex activated the display screens around the room. Data from the simulation scrolled past, showing timelines, decision points, casualty estimates. The numbers were damning. Infrastructure damage exceeded 90%. Supply lines were completely severed. Defensive installations never even fired a shot. I propose we disqualify the human cadets immediately, General Vrex said. This was not a military exercise. This was chaos. Thex touched a control and the corridor door opened. The 6 humans entered the conference room, moving in their characteristic loose formation. They did not look ashamed or concerned. Claire's expression was calm, almost neutral. Owen's fingers had resumed their tapping rhythm against his thigh. Nadia carried her data pad, though it was powered down. Simon's shoulders were relaxed. Grace's eyes moved from general to general, studying each one. Kyle had stopped grinning, but he did not look worried. Cadet Montgomery, Thex said. The generals have raised serious concerns about your conduct during the simulation. You are accused of excessive collateral damage, reckless endangerment, complete disregard for established tactical doctrine, and willful destruction of critical infrastructure. How do you respond to these charges? Claire took one step forward. She did not stand at attention, but her posture straightened slightly. With respect, Commander, we followed the parameters of the exercise exactly as given. You stated that our objective was to hold the colony for 72 hours or achieve victory conditions. We chose victory. General Vrex slammed one massive hand on the table. The impact made several smaller delegates jump in their seats. Victory? You call that victory? The colony is destroyed. The colony was already going to be destroyed, Claire replied, her voice steady and calm. Your scenario was designed to be unwinnable. You said so yourself in the briefing. Every cadet group loses between 30 and 50% of their forces. The best performance on record maintained 68% combat effectiveness. Those numbers mean the colony would suffer massive damage no matter what strategy we employed. The enemy force was 5 times larger than our defensive capability. That is why strategic patience is required, General Korthos interjected. Carefully managed resources, planned withdrawals, efficient use of defensive positions. These are the tools that minimize casualties in an impossible situation. Owen spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a harder edge than Claire's diplomatic tone. Those tools assume the enemy will follow the same rules you do. They assume warfare has limits and boundaries. They assume both sides will behave predictably. All civilized species follow the conventions of armed conflict, a Plin delegate said from the far side of the table. These are not assumptions. These are laws that govern military behavior across the entire Galactic Council. Simon stepped forward to join Claire. Then you have never fought an enemy that refused to follow those laws. On Earth we have. Many times. And we learned that when facing an enemy who will not follow rules, you cannot win by following rules yourself. The conference room erupted into overlapping arguments. Multiple generals spoke at once, their translators creating a cacophony of sound. Thex raised her hand for silence, but it took nearly a minute for the room to quiet down. Nadia activated her data pad and projected a holographic timeline into the center of the table. Earth's history unfolded in floating images. Battles, wars, conflicts spanning thousands of years. This is asymmetric warfare, she said, highlighting specific events. Small forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics. This is guerrilla warfare, where speed and surprise replace traditional military strength. This is our history. This is how humans survived on a world that was actively trying to kill us. Grace added her voice, softer than the others but clear. Every species in this room evolved on stable worlds. Predictable seasons. Manageable weather. Food chains that made sense. Earth is not like that. Our weather can kill in minutes. Our predators hunted us even after we developed tools. Our diseases evolved as fast as we did. Stability was never an option for us. What does your planet's environment have to do with military doctrine? General Korthos asked, though his tone had shifted from anger to something closer to confusion. Kyle spoke up, his earlier grin returning as a thin smile. Everything. On Earth, the concept of acceptable losses is not just military strategy. It is survival instinct. When a storm comes, you do not have time to evacuate everyone. When a predator attacks your village, you cannot save everyone. You make choices. Fast choices. Hard choices. That is barbaric, the Plin delegate whispered. That is reality, Simon countered. Your species developed agriculture on a world with 12-hour days and perfect growing seasons. Ours developed agriculture on a world where floods could destroy entire harvests, where droughts lasted years, where insects could consume everything we planted. We learned to accept that some things would be lost. We learned to focus on survival, not perfection. Claire brought the discussion back to the simulation. You designed a scenario where victory was impossible. Where the only goal was to manage defeat as gracefully as possible. That is not how humans think. When we are told a situation is hopeless, our first instinct is to change the situation entirely. By destroying everything? General Vrex demanded. By removing the enemy's ability to fight, Claire corrected. We did not target civilians deliberately. We targeted the enemy's command structure, their supply lines, their coordination. Without those things, the enemy fleet was no longer a threat. The simulation ended because we achieved total victory over the attacking force. In 15 minutes, Thex said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her. 15 minutes. That is what troubles me most about this situation. Not the collateral damage, though that is significant. Not the violation of doctrine, though that is serious. But the speed. You made dozens of critical decisions in the first 2 minutes of the simulation. How? Owen met her gaze. How long did it take your people to decide on defensive positions when you ran this simulation? Thex accessed her records. The Velcrin cadets took 40 minutes to establish their initial defensive perimeter. The Corthan team took 32 minutes. The fastest decision-making time on record was 18 minutes by a mixed-species team from the Nexari and Plin forces. 18 minutes, Owen repeated. On Earth, giving the enemy 18 minutes to organize is suicide. Speed equals survival. Always has. Always will. The room descended into argument again. Some generals demanded the humans be expelled from the War College immediately. Others wanted additional simulations to better understand what had happened. A few, including General Korthos, had gone very quiet, their expressions thoughtful rather than angry. Thex raised her hand again, and this time the silence came more quickly. This meeting is adjourned. The human cadets will return to their quarters. The evaluation committee will review the simulation data in detail before making any final judgments. You are dismissed. The humans filed out of the conference room. As the door closed behind them, Thex heard Kyle say something to Owen in English, and Owen's quiet laugh in response. They did not sound worried about being expelled. They sounded like people who had just completed a routine training exercise. After the other generals left, Thex remained alone in the conference room. She pulled up the complete simulation data on the display screens. Every decision the humans had made. Every second of the 15-minute engagement. She began analyzing the information flow, tracking what data the cadets had access to at each moment. 3 hours later, she sat back in her chair and felt her scales prickle again. The humans had operated on less than 40% of the available intelligence. They made their first critical decisions within 8 seconds of the simulation starting, before the main displays had even finished loading all the tactical information. They split their forces without confirming enemy positions. They attacked targets without verifying threat levels. They moved through the simulation like they were reading from a script they had already memorized, except they could not have memorized it. They were not analyzing data and making decisions. They were recognizing patterns and reacting with trained instincts. Like predators. Like prey. Like survivors of a world that demanded instant life or death choices as the price of existence. Thex began writing her report. She had a feeling the War College was about to change in ways none of them had anticipated. Commander Thex sat across from Grace Park in the small interview room. The space was designed for privacy with sound-dampening walls and a simple table between 2 chairs. Grace looked relaxed, almost casual, as if this were a friendly conversation rather than a formal evaluation. "Tell me about Earth," Thex said. "Not the military history. I want to understand the planet itself." Grace leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "Earth is beautiful. It is also actively trying to kill everything that lives on it. Our weather systems can change in minutes. A clear sunny day becomes a thunderstorm that drops lightning strikes across entire regions. Tornadoes form in less than an hour and destroy everything in their path. Hurricanes build over warm ocean water and slam into coastlines with winds that tear buildings apart." Thex made notes on her data pad. "But your species developed technology to predict these events, correct? Early warning systems." "We did," Grace agreed. "But prediction is not prevention. We can see a hurricane coming 3 days in advance, but we cannot stop it. We can only evacuate and hope everyone gets out in time. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes the storm changes direction. Sometimes it moves faster than expected. We make decisions with incomplete information because complete information does not exist." The next day, Thex interviewed Owen Chin. He sat with his characteristic finger-tapping rhythm, though slower now, more thoughtful. Thex asked him the same question she had asked Grace. Owen's answer came quickly, without hesitation. "Your species evolved on stable worlds," he said. "I read the reports. The Velcrin homeworld has weather patterns that vary by less than 5% from year to year. The Corthan world has seasons that last exactly the same number of days every cycle. Even the Plin, who come from a harsher environment, have predictable dry seasons and wet seasons that follow reliable patterns." Thex nodded. "This is correct. Stability allowed our civilizations to develop agriculture, permanent settlements, long-term planning." "Exactly," Owen said. "Patience was rewarded. If you waited for the right season, your crops would grow. If you planned carefully, you could store food for the winter. If you gathered complete information about a problem, you could solve it efficiently. That is how your evolutionary psychology developed. Patience equals survival. He stopped tapping his fingers and placed both hands flat on the table. Earth does not work that way. Our seasons are unpredictable. Some years the rains come early. Some years they do not come at all. Some years winter is mild. Some years it kills half your village. Waiting for complete information meant you were already dead. Our ancestors who hesitated, who wanted to analyze all the data before deciding, they got eaten by predators. They froze in sudden cold snaps. They starved when food became scarce without warning. So human evolution favored rapid decision-making, Thex said. Not just rapid, Owen corrected. Rapid decision-making based on incomplete data. A human ancestor hears a sound in the bushes. She does not have time to investigate what made the sound. She has two choices: run away or stay and find out. The ones who ran away sometimes ran from nothing. But they survived. The ones who stayed to gather more information sometimes discovered it was just the wind. But sometimes it was a predator and they died. After millions of years, human brains became very good at making instant threat assessments with minimal information. Thex's interview with Nadia Kovacs happened on the third day. Nadia brought her data pad and pulled up charts showing Earth's geological history. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, asteroid impacts. The list went on for pages. Our planet is geologically active, Nadia explained. The ground beneath our feet is constantly moving. Tectonic plates shift. Volcanoes erupt with little warning. Earthquakes can destroy entire cities in seconds. We have early warning systems now, but they give us minutes, maybe hours if we are lucky. Not days. Not weeks. How did your species survive in such an environment? Thex asked. Nadia smiled, though it was not a happy expression. We learned to accept losses. We learned that not everyone could be saved. When an earthquake hits, you do not have time to evacuate everyone. You save who you can and you mourn the rest. When a volcano erupts, you do not have time to move all your supplies. You grab what is essential and you run. We call it triage. The practice of making quick decisions about who or what can be saved when you cannot save everything. She pulled up another chart, this one showing disease statistics from Earth's history. Our diseases evolved with us. Bacteria and viruses that adapted as fast as we did. Plagues that killed millions. Pandemics that spread across continents. We developed medicine, but the diseases developed resistance. It became an arms race that never ended. Every generation of humans faced new threats that their parents' solutions could not address. This sounds like a nightmare world, Thex said quietly. It is home, Nadia replied. And it made us very good at adapting quickly to new threats. Because on Earth, the threat that kills you is usually the one you did not see coming. Simon Wright's interview focused on Earth's predators. He described animals that hunted in packs, using coordinated tactics. He explained about ambush predators that could wait motionless for hours before striking. He detailed creatures that were stronger, faster, and better armed than early humans. We survived because we learned to think like predators, Simon said. We studied their patterns. We anticipated their movements. We set traps. We used tools. But most importantly, we learned to make decisions faster than they did. A lion decides to attack or not in seconds. Humans who took minutes to decide that same question did not have children. Natural selection is efficient. Kyle Anderson's interview was shorter but no less informative. He focused on human social structures, explaining how Earth's dangers forced humans to develop strong group bonds and rapid communication. When danger comes, humans do not debate, Kyle said. Someone shouts a warning and everyone reacts. We trust our group members to make good decisions quickly because we have to. There is no time for committee meetings when a flash flood is coming. Someone says run and everyone runs. We ask questions later after we are safe. On the sixth day, Thex compiled all her interviews into a comprehensive report. She presented it to the War College Council in a closed session. 15 council members sat in a semicircle, representing the major military powers of the Galactic Council. Thex stood at the center, her presentation displayed on screens around the chamber. What we witnessed in the simulation was not recklessness, she began. It was evolutionary adaptation. Humans are the product of millions of years of survival on a Class 7 death world. Their cognitive processes are fundamentally different from ours. Where we analyze and plan, they recognize patterns and react. Where we seek complete information, they make decisions with partial data. Where we value patience, they value speed. She pulled up brain scan data from the human cadets. Noticed the activity in these regions during decision-making. Human brains process threat assessment in milliseconds. They do not consciously think through all the options. They run pattern recognition algorithms that are built into their neural architecture. When Claire Montgomery saw the simulation parameters, her brain recognized a pattern similar to thousands of scenarios she had trained for. She did not analyze the situation step by step. She knew what to do instantly, the same way you know to pull your hand away from a hot surface without thinking about it. Council member Jerix of the Plin delegation raised an objection. But this makes them dangerous. If they cannot control these instincts, if they react without thinking, they could cause catastrophic damage in real military operations. They do think, Thex countered. But they think differently. Their rapid assessment is not random. It is highly trained pattern recognition. They practice scenarios until the correct responses become automatic. This is actually more reliable than conscious analysis in high-stress situations, because conscious thought slows down under pressure. Human instinct speeds up. She displayed comparison data from previous simulations. Every other species that has run this scenario spent the first 15 to 40 minutes establishing defensive positions. They analyzed the data, discussed options, weighed alternatives. The humans spent 8 seconds looking at the display and then moved. But their movements were not random. They achieved a coordinated assault on 3 critical enemy assets simultaneously. That requires incredible trust, communication, and shared tactical understanding. Council member Vrex, still skeptical, spoke from the back of the chamber. So you are suggesting we adopt human tactics? That we teach our cadets to abandon careful analysis in favor of gut instinct? No, Thex said firmly. I am suggesting we learn from them just as they should learn from us. Human tactics are effective in certain situations, particularly when speed is essential. Our tactics are effective in situations where patience and careful planning provide advantages. Neither approach is universally superior. She took a deep breath before making her proposal. I recommend we run the simulation again. But this time we reverse the roles. A team of alien cadets will attack using human-style tactics. The human cadets will defend using our traditional doctrine. This will test whether human effectiveness comes purely from their evolutionary advantages, or whether their tactical approaches can be learned and applied by other species. The council chamber erupted into discussion. Arguments flew back and forth for nearly an hour. Some council members thought the idea was brilliant. Others considered it a waste of time. Several pointed out that asking alien cadets to replicate human tactics might be impossible given their different evolutionary backgrounds. Finally, Council Chair Mavericks called for a vote. The proposal passed by a narrow margin of 8 to 7. The rematch was scheduled for 1 week later. Thex was authorized to select a team of alien cadets and train them in human tactical approaches. The human cadets would be briefed on traditional defensive doctrine and expected to follow it precisely. As the council session ended, Council member Jerix approached Thex privately. Do you really believe other species can learn to think like humans? To make decisions that fast? Thex considered the question carefully. I believe they can learn the tactics. Whether they can replicate the speed and instinctive decision-making, that remains to be seen. But even if they cannot match human speed, understanding how humans think will make us better allies. And possibly better warriors. She returned to her office and began preparing training materials. In 1 week, the War College would witness something unprecedented. The question was not whether humans could adapt to alien doctrine. Humans had already proven themselves adaptable. The real question was whether the rest of the galaxy could adapt to the way humans saw warfare. Thex suspected the answer would surprise everyone, including herself. The simulation chamber prepared for its second activation in 8 days. Commander Thex stood in the observation deck watching the preparations below. This time, 6 alien cadets occupied the briefing corridor. 2 Velcrin, 2 Corthan, 1 Plin and 1 Nexary. They represented the best tactical students from their respective academies, handpicked by Thex herself for this experiment. For the past week, Thex had worked with them personally. She taught them human tactics. Strike fast. Hit critical targets. Accept collateral damage as necessary. Ignore standard defensive protocols. The alien cadets had listened, taken notes, practiced in smaller simulations. But Thex could see the discomfort in their body language. The Velcrin kept asking about civilian safety zones. The Corthan wanted to establish fallback positions. The concepts felt wrong to them at a fundamental level. The 6 human cadets waited in a different area. They had received their briefing 3 days ago. Claire, Owen, Nadia, Simon, Grace and Kyle would defend the colony using traditional galactic doctrine. Establish perimeters. Maintain communication. Preserve infrastructure. Fight a careful, patient defensive battle for 72 hours. They had studied the doctrine materials without complaint, but Thex noticed they kept exchanging glances that suggested they found the whole thing amusing. General Vrex settled into his observation seat. General Korthos sat beside him. Council members from all major species filled the gallery. Word had spread through the War College about this unusual rematch. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The alien cadets reviewed their positions one final time. They had practiced the human approach to this scenario dozens of times over the past week. Split into 3 groups. Target the ammunition depot, the supply convoy, and the communication hub. Move fast. Strike hard. End the simulation quickly. The countdown reached 0. The alien cadets moved. They ran toward their assigned targets, trying to replicate the speed the humans had demonstrated. But within 30 seconds, problems emerged. The 2 Velcrin heading for the ammunition depot stopped at the first defensive checkpoint. Their training, their instincts, told them to secure each position before moving forward. They spent precious seconds disabling the checkpoint properly, ensuring it could not threaten them from behind. The Korthan team heading for the supply convoy encountered simulated enemy patrols. Human tactics said to avoid or eliminate patrols quickly and keep moving. But the Korthan engaged the patrols in a full firefight, using proper cover and suppression techniques. They won the engagement, but it cost them 3 minutes. The Nexari cadet moving alone toward the communication hub stopped twice to check civilian shelters along the route. She could not help herself. The shelters were marked on her tactical display, and her training demanded she verify they were secure. Each stop took only seconds, but seconds accumulated into minutes. In the observation deck, General Vrex leaned forward. They are too slow. The humans covered this much ground in less than 2 minutes. The alien team has used 4 minutes and barely reached their first objectives. The human cadets, meanwhile, established defensive positions exactly as the doctrine specified. Claire placed her team at the colony's central command post. Owen and Kyle secured the northern approach. Nadia, Simon, and Grace fortified the southern sector. They activated orbital defense platforms. They established communication protocols. They prepared fallback positions in case the primary defenses failed. But Thex noticed something. The humans were following the doctrine, but they were doing it with a speed and efficiency that seemed unusual. Claire's team completed their defensive setup in 6 minutes. Standard doctrine suggested this process should take 15 to 20 minutes. The humans were not breaking the rules, but they were executing them far faster than normal. The alien cadets finally reached their target locations. The 2 Velcrin arrived at the ammunition depot and began their assault. They used the tactics Thex had taught them, planting explosive charges on support structures. But their placement was textbook perfect, spacing measured precisely, following the safety margins to exact specifications. They took time to do it right rather than doing it fast. The Korthan team reached the supply convoy and attempted to hijack it as Owen had done. But they did not have Owen's combination of technical skill and willingness to bypass security protocols through brute force methods. They tried to hack the transport controls properly, using standard military override codes. The simulation's defensive AI detected their attempts and activated security countermeasures. The convoy sealed itself and called for reinforcements. The Nexari cadet reached the communication hub but hesitated at the entrance. Destroying her own side's communications felt fundamentally wrong. She had been trained her entire life that communications were sacred in military operations. Breaking that training, even in a simulation, required a mental effort that slowed her movements. She finally entered the hub and began the shutdown sequence, but her hands shook slightly as she worked. 12 minutes had passed. The humans were fully entrenched in their defensive positions. Their sensors detected the alien cadets' activities and began responding. Claire dispatched quick reaction forces to intercept threats. Owen adjusted his northern defenses to account for unusual enemy movements. Nadia identified the attack on the communication hub and sent Grace to investigate. Grace arrived at the communication hub while the Nexari cadet was still trying to complete the shutdown. In the original human simulation, Nadia had destroyed the hub in 90 seconds. The Nexari cadet had been working for 4 minutes and had only managed to disable 30% of the systems. Grace stunned her with a training weapon and immediately began repairing the damage. The Velcrin cadets detonated their charges at the ammunition depot. The explosion was substantial but controlled. It destroyed the depot without causing the massive chain reaction that Claire's team had triggered. It was a successful military strike, but it was not devastating. The enemy forces lost an ammunition supply point, but their overall combat capability remained largely intact. The Corthan team, unable to hijack the convoy, settled for destroying it in place. They used heavy weapons to disable all 6 transport vehicles. Again, it was successful within the parameters of proper military conduct, but it lacked the spectacular impact of Owen's kamikaze convoy attack on the command ship. 20 minutes into the simulation, Thex could already see the outcome. The alien cadets were following human tactics, but they were doing so with alien caution. Every decision they made was filtered through their evolutionary instincts for careful, measured responses. They could not override millions of years of development that rewarded patience. The simulation continued. The alien attacking force, still coordinated and organized because their command ship remained intact, began their assault on the colony. The human defenders responded with textbook precision. They established overlapping fields of fire. They rotated their forces to prevent fatigue. They maintained communication discipline and followed proper chain of command procedures. But again, Thex noticed the difference. When enemy forces probed the northern defenses, Owen made an adjustment that was not in the standard doctrine manual. He repositioned one squad to create a weak point that appeared vulnerable but was actually a trap. The enemy took the bait and suffered heavy casualties. It was creative thinking within the constraints of defensive doctrine. When the southern sector came under pressure, Nadia coordinated with Simon to execute a fighting withdrawal that drew enemy forces into a kill zone. The maneuver was technically consistent with standard defensive tactics, but the speed and precision of execution went beyond what the doctrine specified. They were not just following rules. They were understanding the principles behind the rules and applying them flexibly. 72 hours of simulation time compressed into 4 hours of real time as the scenario ran its course. The human defense held. They maintained their positions, preserved critical infrastructure, and kept civilian casualties below 20%. When the simulated reinforcements arrived, the colony was damaged but functional. The defending forces had maintained 74% combat effectiveness. It was the best defensive performance in the history of the simulation. The holographic projections faded. The 6 human cadets stood at their command posts, professional and composed. The 6 alien cadets gathered in the attack staging area, looking exhausted and frustrated. They had tried to fight like humans, but their every instinct had worked against them. Thex descended to the briefing room where all 12 cadets assembled. General Vrex and General Korthos joined her, along with several council members. The room was crowded but quiet. What we have witnessed today, Thex began, is the importance of matching tactics to capability. The alien cadets learned human tactical approaches, but they could not execute them at human speed because their evolutionary background did not prepare them for that style of warfare. Conversely, the human cadets demonstrated that they can operate within traditional doctrine when required, but they do so with a flexibility and adaptive quality that goes beyond simple rule following. She pulled up comparative data on the displays. The first simulation ended in 15 minutes with total victory but catastrophic collateral damage. The second simulation ended in 72 hours with successful defense and acceptable casualties. Neither result is inherently better. They represent different approaches to different situations. Claire spoke up. Permission to add something, Commander? Thex nodded. We won the first simulation because speed was our advantage and the scenario had no penalty for collateral damage, Claire said. We won the second simulation because we understood that defensive doctrine exists for good reasons. Protecting civilians matters. Preserving infrastructure matters. We did not abandon the rules. We found ways to be effective within them. One of the Velcrin cadets, a female named Serix, raised her hand hesitantly. I tried to move as fast as the humans. I practiced for a week. But every time I reached a decision point, my mind wanted to analyze, to verify, to confirm. I could not shut off those thoughts. You should not shut them off, Owen said. Those thoughts are what make you good at long-term strategic planning. You do not need to think like humans. You need to understand how humans think so you can work with us effectively. General Korthos stood. I recommend the War College implement a permanent program based on these findings. Not to train aliens to fight like humans or humans to fight like aliens, but to teach both groups to recognize the strengths and limitations of different approaches. The council members conferred quietly among themselves. After several minutes, Council Chair Meverick spoke. The proposal is approved. Commander Thex, you will develop a new course curriculum. It will be mandatory for all tactical cadets regardless of species. Over the following months, the program took shape. Thex named it Adaptive Strategy Under Uncertainty. Human instructors taught alien cadets how to make faster decisions, how to operate effectively with incomplete information, how to recognize patterns rather than analyzing every detail. Alien instructors taught human cadets the value of patience, how to plan for long-term operations, how to minimize casualties through careful coordination. The course became one of the most popular in the War College. Cadets from all species requested placement in the program. The simulation chamber ran constantly, testing different combinations of tactics and approaches. Some scenarios favored speed. Others rewarded patience. The best performances came from mixed teams that could adapt their approach to the situation. 6 months after the original simulation, a new class of cadets assembled for their first battle doctrine assessment. They filed into the briefing corridor, nervous and excited. The observation deck filled with spectators, including several generals who had witnessed the original human simulation. Claire Montgomery stood in the observation deck beside Commander Thex. She wore an instructor's insignia now, having been offered a teaching position at the War College. Thex had insisted that humans should help train the next generation of tactical officers. The countdown began for the new simulation. Thex activated the communication system, her voice carrying into the briefing room below. Cadets, your objective is to defend the colony for 72 hours until reinforcements arrive. Minimize casualties and preserve critical infrastructure. She paused, then glanced at Claire. Claire leaned toward the microphone, a slight smile on her face. Or find another way. We'll teach you both.